San Diego's highest paid city employees are cops who work a tremendous amount of overtime. And that is according to a recent investigation from KPBS. And to discuss how the city and the police chief plan to rein in overtime hours and spending, I'm joined by KPBS investigative reporter Scott Rodd. Welcome, Scott.
Hi, Maya.
We watched part one yesterday. Incredible investigation. But can you give us, in a nutshell, what you found?
Sure. So we looked at police officers who, as you mentioned in the intro, are making just tremendous amounts in overtime pay. And we found that the highest paid city employees, going back now several years, are all cops who were making hundreds of thousands of dollars in overtime. Some of them were doubling their base salary in overtime pay. And that means they're working 1,000, maybe 2,000 hours of overtime every year. We found one officer who worked 3,000 hours of overtime. And that raises, of course, concerns on the financial side of things, especially as the city has an issue with the budget deficit. But it also raises concerns about officer safety and public safety, because if these officers are fatigued, if these officers are working way too many hours, research and studies show that there's a higher likelihood of complaints against officers, of use of force incidents, and of accidents while they're out there serving the public.
Well, you posed this information to Chief Scott Wall, so tell us, how did he respond?
Well, he said that the reason for the overtime, and he actually described overtime as the department's lifeblood. So he really emphasized that overtime is important for them. Overtime is essential for them to respond to calls, to meet just their basic obligations. And he said that the reason for all this overtime is because of vacancies.
So you come to work, the second you drive out of the station, you're going to a call, and then you're dropping what you're doing, you're going to another call, and another call, and another call until you go home. No time to problem solve, no time to community police.
And that issue of community policing is really important. The chief says that he wants to see more of that, but again, right now, due to the staffing shortages, due to the vacancies, this overtime is just basically to make sure that they can respond to calls, get out there, and meet the baseline responsibilities they have.
I understand that, but does Chief Wall have concerns about that much overtime?
So yes and no. So in terms of the officers making hundreds of thousands of dollars in overtime, some of them making over $400,000 per year in total compensation, he says, no, that's not a concern. He says they work those overtime hours, they earn that money. So for him, that's not a concern. He also cast doubt that the overtime that these officers are working would be contributing to increased complaints or potentially more use of force incidents. He said they're not seeing any sort of pattern when it comes to officers working this overtime and officers facing complaints. And here's what he said in terms of kind of pushing back on that narrative.
There are so many factors in life that can contribute to somebody that is overstressed, overburdened, or just mentally or physically or emotionally exhausted. Just to come in and say, well, it's because they've worked too much overtime, it's very difficult to say that that's the case for everybody. It's really on an individual basis.
Now, the chief did say that he believes there should be some guardrails in place. He believes that having a cap on shift lengths for 16 hours is reasonable. Right now, some officers are working more than that, some working more than 17, 19-hour shifts. He also said requiring 8-hour breaks in between is reasonable. He would support that. He also would support mandating 1 day off a week. He did say that the union would have to buy into this, but those are some limitations that he supports.
Okay. Well, San Diego is facing a budget deficit, and the latest number is $300 million. So how will that impact the department's overtime?
Well, the chief is saying that he wants to trim back on the amount of money that they're spending on overtime. This is, it's going to be tough. It's going to be easier said than done. Most of the last 10 years, the department has spent more on overtime than they anticipated when they first entered the fiscal year. And this year is no different. They're going to spend $10 million more than anticipated. So reducing that spending will be difficult. One way that the chief hopes to do that, not only next year, but in the coming years, is to hire more civilian employees. And this is what he said on that.
I went through a reorganization when I took over here. I really am trying to bring the civilian staff in to run the business side of this organization, if you will, and get officers out in the field doing police work. Our civilian employees help keep this place running 24/7.
So this push to get more civilian employees, that they can handle things like records management, some outreach to the community. That might be difficult considering the city is facing such a big budget deficit. It may be hard to make those hires. He's hoping to see that in the coming years. In the meantime, though, he is proposing some of those trims to overtime. The city council pushed back and said, well, we're not so sure about that. We don't want that to impact public safety. But Mayor Todd Gloria's final budget proposal did keep those overtime cuts.
Well, we look forward to more from you, Scott Rod. Thank you so very much. We appreciate this hard work.
Thank you.
And if you have a tip for KPBS investigations team, you can send an email to investigations@kpbs.org, or you can message them on our secure signal line at the number on your screen, 619-594-8177.